this hearing will come to order. First of all, I'd like to thank all the witnesses for your very thoughtful testimony. I've read it, and just appreciate you taking the time to be so thoughtful. Want to thank all the people attending this what I consider very important hearing. I do have a written opening statement that, without objection, I'd like to enter in the record. Hearing none, so ordered. The subject of this hearing is complex. That really made an impression on me as I was reading the testimony. I come from a manufacturing background. This, to me, is the definition of a real problem. There are no easy solutions. So the attempt of this hearing is really trying to, in a very honest, very forthright way, lay out the problem and what we need to do to try and grapple with the problem. Let me say, to me, the problem starts with the fact that we do not have secure borders. We have not had secure borders for decades, and that creates the second problem, which is more the subject of the hearing today. And as a result of those borders that are not secure, we have literally we've almost enticed people to come into this country illegally. Now we've got a population estimate somewhere between 11 and 12 million people in this country illegally. That's a problem. That's not good for them. That's not good for this country. That's not good for our national security, for public health and safety, and it certainly does not promote a functioning legal immigration system. So the purpose of this hearing, I think, is laid out just in the title. Deferred action on immigration, implications and unanswered questions. What I'd really like to explore is, obviously, President Obama has now a couple times, through executive action, through memorandums published, deferred action first on childhood admissions, and now he's deferring action on parents of American citizens and other legal permanent residents. The question I have, and I think it's a legitimate question, is are those executive actions, are those going to help the problem? Or is it going to exacerbate the problem? Is it going to make it worse? And I think that's a legitimate question to ask. I think we have some history which we'll be exploring. Our witnesses, and I will introduce you before you testify, but we have the Chief Actuary of Social Security to talk about the effects on our Social Security system. We have an expert on tax compliance and tax fraud, which I think will be interesting to hear the effects of the executive actions in that situation. We have a former official of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and also and he's a commissioner of the Customs and Border Protection, to find out, is that agency going to be able to cope with the increased number of applications and people seeking this legal status. We have an official with the National Border Patrol Council, basically the union of Customs and Border Patrol agents, and we have a former general counsel of the Department of Homeland Security's predecessor organization, the Immigration Naturalization Services Agency. And again, I think there's going to be some very thoughtful testimony, and I'm looking forward to it. Here's my main concern. If we can put up a chart that we've prepared here, we've seen the results of deferred action in the past, and I think it's relatively stark. We had unaccompanied children coming across the border historically, but the numbers were actually declining until basically 2012, when President Obama issued the first series, or his agencies, or his members of his administration issued memos on deferred action on childhood admissions. And I think, just pictorially, graphically, it's pretty stark what the result was. We had a flooding of unaccompanied children to our border, creating that humanitarian crisis. And even though those memorandums did not apply to people coming into this country at that time, that didn't make any difference. And if you take a look at the bottom line there that's in yellow, that's showing the percentage of those unaccompanied children that were actually removed from this country, actually sent back to their countries of origin. You can see how that's declined from 21.4 and 21.7% in 2009, 2010 to only 2.2% in the last year, 2014. So I think this is certainly evidence, and it's my concern that President Obama's deferred action now in this latest round of memorandum could create that same dynamic, actually increase the incentives for illegal immigration, no matter what the memorandums say, actually create the incentives for more people to come into this country illegally, increase the pressure on the border. And again, I think that's a legitimate question to ask. Now, I'd like to conclude my comments by acknowledging the fact that we are a nation of immigrants. We always have been. It has made our nation strong and vibrant. The vast majority of people coming into this country as immigrants, whether legally or illegally, are doing the same for the same reason that our ancestors came here. They are seeking the opportunity, the hope, the promise of this great nation. So I understand that, and we need to value their contributions. But we have to recognize there are literally hundreds of millions, if not a billion or more people that would like to become American citizens, that would like to come to this country. We have to make that a legal process. We have to control that. We have to make sure that what immigration we do allow in this country is done for the benefit of all Americans. And so it's got to be a legal system. So again, I'm looking forward to the testimony. I'm looking for a very thoughtful discussion. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our ranking member, Senator Carper, for his opening comments.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. To our witnesses, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. We're here today to learn more about the implementation, I'll say again, the implementation of the President's executive actions on immigration. I think it's fair and reasonable oversight for this committee to take, and I'm glad that we're here, and I'm glad that you're here. As with any new government initiative, there are likely to be a variety of bureaucratic challenges that need to be addressed. We'll talk about those today. So I look forward to hearing from all of you, our witnesses, about the challenges that might lie ahead, as well as some possible solutions to those challenges. Last Congress, this committee and the entire Senate spent a great deal of time examining our nation's broken immigration system. And after months of debate, two-thirds of the United States Senate, including Democrats and Republicans, came together to pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill. The bill wasn't perfect. Plenty of ways to improve it. My hope is that we will. But it did address a number of issues that have plagued our immigration system for years. Perhaps just as important, it would have also reduced our budget deficits by, listen to this, nearly $200 billion over the next 10 years, and by another $700 billion in the 10 years after that. Moreover, it would have grown our gross domestic product by 5% over the next 20 years. As we know, unfortunately, the House did not act on that legislation. As a result, we continue to be left with a broken immigration system that meets neither our economic nor our security needs as a nation. Faced with paralysis here in Congress and continued inefficiency and unfairness in our immigration system, whether you like it or not, the President has decided to try and make several temporary improvements, hoping it would spur those of us in Congress to finish the job that we began almost 2 years ago. Those improvements or changes were not meant to be permanent, but they are what brings us to this debate today. Look, I know many of our colleagues, some on this committee and some not on this committee, have strong misgivings about the President acting on his own on these matters. Nonetheless, I hope we can set aside any frustrations over tactics and look at the substance of what the administration is trying to do. If we can find a way to do that, I think we just might find room for common ground at the end of the day. After all, that's what the American people sent us here to do. There are more than, as the Chairman has said, more than 11 million people living in this country without documentation. We'd not be able to remove all of them even if we wanted to try, and we should not try. Some of these individuals are young adults brought here as children with no choice of their own in that matter. They are Americans in every way except on paper. Others are productive and law-abiding parents of U.S. citizens or legal residents who have lived here, in some cases, for decades. Allowing these folks who live in our communities to work legally and pay full taxes will be good for both our economy and for our federal government. In fact, the Council on Economic Advisors has estimated that these new administration initiatives, along with other immigration policies announced in November, would increase our nation's gross domestic product by $90 billion over the next 10 years. These changes would also lead to a decrease in federal deficits by somewhere between $25 and $50 billion over the next 10 years as well. Blocking or repealing the administration's initiatives would take us backwards. In fact, just last week, the Congressional Budget Office reported that the House bill to block these deferred deportation programs that the Senate declined to take up and consider yesterday would cost our economy $7.5 billion over 10 years. I'll say that again, $7.5 billion over 10 years. Estimates indicate that more than 4 million immigrants will be eligible for the temporary deportation relief outlined by the President. And while not all those eligible are expected to apply, many will. And that will allow the administration to focus its limited enforcement resources on the highest priorities for removal, those who pose security risks to our country, or recent arrivals without long-standing ties to our nation. That is more than enough work for our border security and immigration enforcement officials to handle, even at record deportation levels that we've seen in recent years. So in sum, based on what we know so far, I've come to the conclusion that the initiatives whose implementation we're examining today are feasible, are fair, make good economic sense, and actually enhance our nation's security. And whether we agree with that or not, these initiatives are interim steps. Let me just say, these should not be the final steps. Those are the ones that we need to take by doing the hard work of rebuilding the consensus that allowed two-thirds of the Senate just 2 years ago to support compromise immigration reform legislation. And so as I close, I want to thank the chairman for calling this hearing together. While there's some disagreement about what the President has done, I hope we can all agree that this hearing is a proper forum to have a debate on immigration policy. I don't believe that we should be threatening to shut down the Department of Homeland Security, an agency vital to our nation's security, over disagreements with the President's policies. All three former Homeland Security secretaries, 2 of them Republicans, 1 of them a Democrat, agree with me on that point. In the next several days, I hope that most of us can come together to do what I believe is the right thing, and that is support the passage of a clean, full-year appropriations bill for the Department of Homeland Security by February 27th, and then get to work to pass a thoughtful, comprehensive immigration reform bill that is worthy of this body and to which all of us are privileged to serve. Let me just say, if I could, last night I got home and had a late dinner with my wife, and she was troubled. And I said, "What's bothering you?" And she said, "The Jordanian pilot that was burned to death in a cage today, that's what's bothering me." And my friends, we live in a world that's scary. It is scary. And it's not just people being burned to death in a cage by ISIS or ISIS beheading people. It's not just them doing mass murders or enslaving women into servitude to them. It's not just that. It's not just lone wolves in Detroit trying to gather the munitions and the equipment that would enable them to come down here and attack this place where we work. It's not just Ebola. It's not just people trying to get drugs into this country illegally or trafficking human beings. All that is going on. It's not just about trying to make sure our airplanes are safe and our airports and our ports are secure, that we're able to move products through our borders. All that stuff is being done this day in large part because of the work of the Department of Homeland Security. And for anybody to be thinking that it might make some sense to let that department go out of business, to put them on the sidelines at this time, in this age in which we live, have we lost our minds? Have we lost our minds? I hope not. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carper. I think Mrs. Carper, by the way, is voicing the concerns of most Americans. We all share the same goal. We want a prosperous country. We want a safe and secure nation, which is why, we have the mission of this committee is to enhance the economic and national security of America. And so, again, I appreciate your comments. I don't believe there's anybody serving in the United States Congress that doesn't want to keep this nation safe and secure. We want to make sure that the department is going to be funded. It's one of the reasons that a number of our leaders, including myself, did ask President Obama not to initiate this executive action, which so many of us do disagree with. That's what's created this issue. Without those actions, DHS would have been funded through the end of the fiscal year, and we'd be talking about funding for the next fiscal year. So it's unfortunate we're going to have to grapple with this, and I think the best way to do it is what we're doing here today is let's have an honest discussion, and let's talk about what the intended and unintended consequences of that action would be. It is the tradition of this committee to swear in witnesses, so if you could all rise. Raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Witnesses are sworn in. We will begin testimony with Mr. Stephen Goss. He has been the Chief Actuary for the Social Security Administration since 2001 and has worked in the Office of the Chief Actuary for over 40 years. Mr. Goss.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Carper, members of the committee, thank you very, very much for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. Immigration, as both Chairman Johnson and Senator Carper have mentioned, is an incredibly important part of the evolution of the population in the United States. We're here to talk today and for me to share with you some estimates that we have developed in my office about the implications of the recent executive actions put forth by the President on November 20 of last year. It includes, if I may give the short form, the DACA extension and the DAPA program, along with several other provisions. It is not just those two that are included in these. These proposals, these actions that have been put forth will have significant implications for the population, the economy, and also Social Security finances. They will also have significant implications beyond even just Social Security and Medicare. Let me just share with you that net immigration into the United States adds about 1 million extra people into our population every year. Now compare that with 4 million births that we have in our shores every year. That's a substantial component of the growth of our population. It not only causes our population to grow faster than it would otherwise, but it also changes the age distribution, which is a long topic, but it's incredibly critical to the financing of Social Security, Medicare, and all retirement plans in this country. With the drop in birth rates that we had back in 1965, if we did not have the kind of net immigration that we have now, with young people coming in about 1 million every year, we would have much more severe challenges for Social Security, Medicare, and all of our retirement plans in the country. Now, let me just address a little bit the financial implications for the national economy of the executive actions as we have estimated them, and many assumptions need to be made. As you know, we have made those assumptions. We assume that individuals, first of all, who come to the United States without documentation or who have overstayed visas and are not currently legally documented status, will be working in our economy at about the same rate as other people at the same age and sex. Per Senator Johnson's comments, people come here. It is a land of economic opportunity. That's why people come here by and large. So we assume the rate of people being employed and working in the economy is about the same. Thus, extra employment from extra immigration, by whatever means, does generate extra GDP, as noted from some other sources. By 2024, we estimate that the increase in our overall population in the U.S. will be about 359,000 individuals, about 248,000 of which will be additional employed individuals in our economy. And this will cause the gross domestic product in 2024 to be about 0.15% more than it would otherwise be. Not a lot, but these are small actions relative especially to S-744 passed by the Senate just a year ago. By 2050, we project that the added population as it ages, from especially the DAPA-DACA groups, we project there will be about 922,000 increase in the population by that time, about 408,000 of whom will be workers, and that will cause GDP at that time in 2050 to be about 0.22% higher than it would otherwise be. Now, implications for Social Security, sort of our bailiwick. The net annual cash flow, that is tax income coming into Social Security, less the cost that we pay out from Social Security for all purposes, for the combined Social Security, OESI, and DI trust funds will be increased for 2015 through 2045 when the individuals granted legal work status under these provisions will still be at younger working ages. However, for 2046 through 2082, as these same groups will be aging, they will be moving from working ages into benefit ages, and assuming that they stay around with us, that they have worked, that they have gotten earnings credits and get benefits later, then we'll have the reverse, and the cash flow for Social Security will go negative for that period of time. As it happens, and the estimates that we worked out for the totality of all the provisions of these executive actions, we have a small long-range positive, but it's very small. It's 0.01% of payroll, and that's relative, by the way, to a 2.88% of payroll shortfall for Social Security as a whole over the next 75 years. So it's a small positive, not a big thing, but it's essentially neutral. Now, we project by 2024 that we'll have 925 additional workers paying taxes into the Social Security system. This increase comes from increases in workers in the national economy mentioned above, but in addition, it comes from people who are now in the informal economy, sometimes called the underground economy, who will be moved into the formal economy and will begin paying taxes by our estimates. The added workers paying taxes is fairly stable at about 1 million for years 2024 through 2050. Now, let me just address very briefly the sort of components of the executive actions, just to make sure that we've got them all on the table. There are two components that principally address, well, that really address legal permanent residence. One is the entrepreneurs, about 10,000 per year additional. That will create a significant increase over time in our population of people who are legal permanent residents working and contributing. Also, from all the provisions, the net effect, we estimate, will be an increase in the population at childbearing ages, and therefore there will be additional children born on our soil, who of course will be natural-born citizens. Those are the components that are on the legal side. There are several components, of course, that operate on the undocumented side. And I see we're kind of getting really low on time here, so I will be very, very brief on this. Of course, the first thing that we point to is the increased border security. And the second item is emphasis on enforcement for people within our borders to go after people mainly who are security risks. We see those as having somewhat offsetting effects. The exact magnitudes, we've made estimates, it's not clear, but we think that those will be probably largely offsetting. Of course, there's the expansion of the DACA and the introduction of the DAPA. We estimate that those will result in substantial numbers of people filing for and receiving authorization. But the key point about those groups are that they are groups that are, for the DACA, still generally very young. For the DAPAs, they're still sort of relatively low ages, so they're what we would refer to as a closed group of people. It's a temporary action. Those people would get work status. We assume they'll be re-upped if they do not do bad things along the way, and then they will continue to work in our economy and eventually get the ability to get benefits. And with that said, I guess I should conclude and just say, again, thank you very, very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to hearing all the other testimonies and any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goss. Our next witness is Eileen O'Connor. She's a partner at Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman LLP, where she practices tax law. Ms. O'Connor has served as Assistant Attorney General of the Tax Division at the Department of Justice on the President's Corporate Tax Fraud Force and previously worked at the Internal Revenue Service. Ms. O'Connor.
Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. And for those of you who are new to the Senate in Washington, welcome. Glad to have you here. I'm speaking today on my own behalf. Thank you for turning on my talk button. Speaking today on my own behalf, not on behalf of my partners, my firm's clients. I'm speaking to you on the basis of my experience with tax enforcement. There are a couple of concepts that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about the effects of the deferred actions. One is the individual tax identification number. My colleague to the right just mentioned that some people who were subject to the deferred action might be moving from the informal to the formal economy and therefore start paying taxes. A great number of people who are in the country illegally are already paying taxes. So I think that when we look at the numbers that were offered for that movement, we need to keep that in mind. The Individual Tax Identification Number, or ITIN, was developed because the Internal Revenue Code applies to all U.S. source income and all U.S. persons. Not everyone who has U.S. source income is a U.S. person and therefore qualified for a Social Security number. So tax identification numbers were established to permit the Internal Revenue Service to track the returns and the tax payments of people who are not U.S. persons but have U.S. tax liabilities. In 1996, the Internal Revenue Service started issuing ITINs to illegal aliens. In 1999, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration reported to Congress and to the Internal Revenue Service that this created a direct contradiction with the obligation of the government to enforce the immigration laws, and asked Congress or the IRS to do something about that. That has yet to happen. The Treasury Inspector General also reported to Senator Roth that illegal aliens were being given the earned income tax credit. Senator Roth then saw to it that legislation was enacted, making it clear that in order to be receiving the earned income tax credit, you have to have a Social Security number, meaning you're a U.S. person authorized to work in the United States. I need to talk just a second about the Earned Income Tax Credit. It is a refundable credit. There are more than one refundable credit. There's the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Additional Child Tax Credit. A refundable credit is not a refund and not really a credit. It is a credit that exceeds the amount of tax somebody has paid in. My colleague to the right has mentioned the increase in Social Security taxes that will be collected. Social Security taxes are collected from people who are earning wages, but then they are given back in the form of the Earned Income Tax Credit. So a refundable tax credit will reduce reduce tax liability below zero and result in checks being paid to the person who claimed the credit. The Earned Income Tax Credit is not available for people who don't have Social Security numbers, but the law on the Additional Child Tax Credit, also a refundable credit, is not that clear. Some people think it is clear, and unless you have a Social Security number, you're not eligible for the credit. Other people, the Internal Revenue Service believes that it's very clear that a Social Security number is not required. So this Internal Revenue Service makes no effort to determine the alien legal status of people who are claiming the Additional Child Tax Credit. The Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration issues report after report, year after year, about the Internal Revenue Service's handling of ITIN filed returns and refundable credits, and reports such horrifying statistics as, in 1 year, the Internal Revenue Service sent 24,000 checks to a single address, refunding tens of millions of dollars in tax that probably was not paid. And this is where some of my experience at the Justice Department comes in. There are many, many scams. These refundable credits and ITINs create an attractive nuisance. Just like securities criminals have pump and dump schemes, there are ITIN refund mills. And the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration estimates that over a 10-year period, $122 billion in taxpayer dollars was sent to said criminals. Now, this is not to say that everyone who files an ITIN return is a criminal, but the fact that we have refundable credits in the Internal Revenue Code that are paid to anybody who asks them, ITINs are available very easily. The General Accounting Office reported to the Internal Revenue Service years ago that ITINs were easily obtained on bogus documents, and once obtained, they were also used for other purposes. Many states permit the use of an ITIN, although it requires no proof of identity. Permit the use of an ITIN as evidence, documentation supporting a driver's license or property ownership or other things, purposes for which the ITIN was never intended. It was intended only to permit the Internal Revenue Service to track payments and to track returns. So my time is running out, but I have many more horrifying statistics in my written testimony. I hope that you will refer to it. It includes largely summaries of many of the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration's reports over the years, which in turn contain many, many more statistics. I have just summarized them ever so briefly in my testimony. We know from experience that the actions upon which the administration has embarked are guaranteed to inflict substantial damage on tax administration and enforcement, and to drain even more billions of dollars from the Treasury, even more than the past follies are already costing and continue to cost us. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor. Our next witness is Luke Balaki. He is of counsel at Wasserman, Mancini, and Chang, and former senior official of the Department of Homeland Security and Assistant Commissioner of the Customs and Border Protection. Mr. Balaki.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, members of the committee, thank you for the honor of allowing me to testify today before this committee, for which I was once a staff member. The President's new initiative to stay deportation for an estimated 4 to 5 million undocumented immigrants will create incredible pressure on U.S. citizenship and immigration services to handle millions of new applications. This will be the largest wave of applications USCIS has ever seen. USCIS is still primarily a paper-based, mail-based application adjudicatory body. USCIS has 13,000 employees, or 13,000 officers, and 5,000 contractors to handle about 6 million applications per year. USCIS plans to hire about 1,000 new employees to handle DAPA. It's hard to imagine how they're going to be able to get those 1,000 people onboarded, go through security clearance, and be trained to handle that many applications. More likely, USCIS will divert resources from processing other applications to handle DAPA applications. This is, in fact, what they did with DACA applications. And that has created some backlogs in other types of applications. For example, I-130 green card, family green card applications, and employment authorization cards, or EAD. An EAD is very important to an immigrant who's working. If the EAD expires, usually 1 or 2 years, they cannot continue work, and this puts their employer and employees in a lurch. But in fact, that's what's happening in good numbers. In fact, it's happening to DACA applicants who applied 1 or 2 years ago, and their EADs are expiring now. In fact, by one estimate, 25% of EADs for DACA applicants are not being renewed in time for them to continue work. This is the problem with trying to push through so many applications all at once without having the proper resources. This reminds me of a program that was handled in INS in the mid-90s called Citizenship USA, in which 1 million people were naturalized. INS hired a lot of people very quickly. In some cases, only gave them about 40 hours of training. And of course, mistakes were made. In fact, in that case, more than 60,000 people were naturalized without any kind of background check, and over 10,000 felons were actually naturalized. Department of Justice had to go back and denaturalize a lot of them. You'd think USCIS would try and avoid this problem again, but we're seeing evidence from emails that have been released by management that managers are telling their frontline people to use streamlined, light background checks, abbreviated text checks, and to accept pretty much any kind of documentation of their identity when they go for biometric checks. This is a population that we have to be very careful about. Unlike visa applicants who came through the border and were checked at one time, if they entered without inspection at all, crossed the border at some point, they may have never gone through any kind of check. Now, the fingerprint checks are going to be run through the FBI, and of course, if they were ever arrested or convicted in this country, they're going to show up with that identity. But if they ever committed a crime in a foreign country, we're not sure that they would be flagged. Further, there's some evidence that the background checks are not being checked against the entire counterterrorism database, as evidenced by a Boston bomber who was naturalized 7 months before he perpetrated his crime. He was on actually the expanded counterterrorism watch list as well. As far as anti-fraud goes, FDNS, which is the USCIS anti-fraud office, I've been told has been taken out of document review for DACA cases. And the evidentiary standard for getting through DACA is actually quite low, as I alluded to earlier, in terms of identity and so forth. With DAPA applicants, they'll be dealing with family relationships. I understand that mostly assertions and documents will be used to confirm family relationships, and DNA testing will not be used. In summary, I'll just say that USCIS officers are very hardworking, patriotic people, but they are a service-oriented agency, and they will try and get through all these applications in the time frame given to them. But in doing so, if they're not realistic and honest about the resources they will need and the time it'll take to process these applications properly, they're going to run into problems. And I urge them to take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Balaki. Our next witness is Sean Moran. He's Vice President of the National Border Patrol Council and has over 17 years of experience as a Border Patrol agent. Mr. Moran.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Carper, members of the committee, on behalf of the 16,500 Border Patrol agents who I represent, I want to thank you for having this hearing today. My name is Sean Moran. I'm the Vice President and National Spokesperson of the National Border Patrol Council. I am a 17-year veteran of the U.S. Border Patrol and have spent the majority of my career in the Imperial Beach and El Cajon Border Patrol stations in California. I have also been temporarily assigned to several sectors and stations along the southwest border during that time. Before I discuss how I believe the President's decision will impact border security, I want to be clear that I am not a lawyer. I'm not here to comment on the legality of the President's actions. I'm here as a federal law enforcement agent to discuss how the amnesty provided in November will impact border security. Unfortunately, I do not believe that border security implications were fully considered prior to the issuance of the executive order, and that concrete actions need to be taken by Congress and the administration this year to bolster border security. Albert Einstein's definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. If you look at the history of our response to illegal immigration, we certainly meet that definition. In 1986, Congress passed and President Reagan signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act, IRCA. The legislation was supposed to solve the illegal immigration problem in this country, and in the process legalized illegal aliens who had been in the country prior to 1982. What was the result? Illegal immigration exploded in this country. The Pew Research Center estimates that the population of illegal aliens in this country in 1990, immediately following the passage of IRCA, was 3.5 million. By 2007, that population had swelled to 12.2 million. Cities like San Diego, where I live, and El Paso were nearly overrun. In my career, I have arrested and interviewed thousands of illegal aliens. In deciding whether or not to attempt to enter this country illegally, these individuals weigh the risks and potential rewards. These individuals are risking not only a lifetime of savings to pay the smugglers, but literally their own lives in the process. They know the border is a dangerous place. They know that they are opening themselves up to predation from smugglers, in addition to the physical hazards of crossing the Rio Grande River, the Arizona desert, or even the wilderness of Montana. Unfortunately, since the passage of IRCA, there's a perception among illegal aliens that if you can get over the border and can hide in the shadows long enough, eventually there will be a pathway to legal status. This pathway may be by virtue of the duration you have been in this country or through your children. We need to only look to the debacle last summer with unaccompanied minors to see how prevalent this perception is among potential illegal aliens. Last year, the administration took great pains to point out that their most recent expansion of deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, was a continuation of deferred actions that had been taken by previous administrations. We were all told that there was precedent for their actions, and the administration was completely correct. There were ample amounts of precedent, and therein lies the problem. We will never be able to stop illegal immigration until potential illegal aliens believe that it is a losing proposition. They need to know that they will be found and that hiding in the shadows will do them no good. Employers need to know that if they hire illegal aliens, there will be credible sanctions. The question then becomes what steps this committee within your jurisdiction can take to strengthen border security before the next wave of illegal immigration occurs. Several suggestions that I have include increased manpower. Currently, there are 21,370 Border Patrol agents in this country. Under sequestration, we effectively lost 1,500 full-time equivalents that have thankfully been restored under the Border Patrol Pay Reform Act introduced by Senators Tester and McCain. We do not have to double the size of the Border Patrol to gain operational control of the border, but we are, in my opinion, approximately 5,000 agents short of where we should be. The National Border Patrol Council would advocate that of this number, 1,500 be sent to the northern border, which is woefully understaffed, and the remaining 3,500 positions be allocated to interior enforcement, which is virtually non-existent. Supervising staffing levels. The Border Patrol is an extremely top-heavy organization with far too many layers of management and a convoluted chain of command. Although Congress has provided the funding to double the size of the Border Patrol, we have not doubled the number of agents at the border. Let me explain that. The average large police department has one supervisor for every 10 officers. The Border Patrol has one supervisor for every 4 agents. The committee should mandate a 10-to-1 ratio and achieve it through attrition in the supervisory ranks. Second problem is that we have agents doing duties like processing and transportation that could be handled more cost-effectively by non-law enforcement personnel. Interior enforcement. Every night we effectively play goal line defense because all of our resources and assets are concentrated right at the border instead of having a defense in depth. Let me give you an example. In Arizona, we have 7,000 agents. And of all those agents, we have, do you know how many agents we have assigned to Phoenix, which is an important transit point for traffickers? The answer is 0. The Border Patrol's northernmost station in Arizona is Casa Grande, which is 50 miles south of Phoenix. We also advocate for better training. During the buildup of the Border Patrol during the Bush administration, the Border Patrol Academy's duration was reduced from approximately 20 weeks to as little as 54 days if you spoke Spanish. This is simply not enough time to properly train an agent and weed out those who are not up to the challenge. The committee should require that the Academy revert back to 20 weeks. Again, I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to testify today, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Our next witness is Bo Cooper. He's a partner at Fragaman, Del Rey, Burnson, and Lowy LLP, and former general counsel at the Immigration and Naturalization Service from 1999 to 2003. Mr. Cooper.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Carper, and distinguished members of the committee, I appreciate very much the opportunity to join you today for this important discussion. The perspectives I'll offer are based on decades of involvement with the U.S. immigration system, about half in the government and about half in private practice and teaching. And when I was general counsel of the INS, I served administrations of both parties and was a career public servant. Every new government initiative, especially one of this scale, needs to be examined for cost, achievability, risk, and benefits, and the committee's right to be doing so here. And I acknowledge and respect the view that you expressed, Chairman Johnson, that you disfavor the decision of the President to initiate these programs. But I also appreciate very much the spirit of open discussion that you've established, and I'd like to try to offer some suggestions for why I believe that DAPA and DACA are sensible policy initiatives that can be carried out effectively by DHS and that deserve the support of the Congress and the American public. First, DACA and DAPA will help the U.S. economy. As you noted, Ranking Member Carper, the Council of Economic Advisors has concluded that DACA and DAPA will increase gross domestic product by $90 billion over the next decade. They also estimate that the programs will help and not harm American workers by growing wage levels overall, modestly, but growing. At the same time, we've heard from Mr. Goss that the addition of new taxpayers should positively affect the Social Security safety net. In addition, the programs are designed not to cost the taxpayer anything in implementation because they'll be funded by the user fees that support U.S. citizenship and immigration services. And then just last week, CBO concluded that if DACA and DAPA are eliminated by legislation, that decision would increase the federal deficit by $7.5 billion over the next decade. DACA and DAPA are smart economically. Second, DACA and DAPA are smart public safety policy. Law enforcement currently has too little idea who the undocumented immigrants in our country are, where they work, where they live. DACA and DAPA will help to change this, not completely, but they'll significantly help to change this. Millions of people who are now in the shadows will come forward and provide biographical information, including biometrics, to the federal government. On this point, we can take it from the public safety experts. In the lawsuit that's been filed and heard in Brownsville, Texas, in district court to challenge DACA and DAPA, a brief was filed by the Major City Chiefs Association. This organization represents chiefs and sheriffs that serve nearly 70 million people in this country. In that brief, those law enforcement officials explain the significant advantages that DACA and DAPA will bring to them and their work. First of all, the programs will firmly establish identity for a far greater number of people. Better identification means better coordination of law enforcement data, including prior crimes and arrests. Also, when police officers encounter people who lack identification, typically they've got to then arrest the person and bring them in for further processing. Where that person has proper identification, that issue comes off the table, and the officers then can make better decisions about how to prioritize their resources and where to focus. In addition, DACA and DAPA will make undocumented victims and witnesses more likely to come forward to speak to police trying to prevent and investigate crimes. And more information means better law enforcement. Third, DAPA and DACA are smart immigration policy. With resources to remove only about 400,000 people each year, out of the estimated 11 million people who are subject to removal, DHS necessarily must exercise prosecutorial discretion and establish enforcement priorities. They've made the decision to place maximum focus on those who present security threats, on criminals, and those with the most recent border violations and removal orders. It's equally sensible to formally identify those people who are not enforcement priorities and to provide them with temporary authorization to be present and to work. With DAPA, that decision is being made with respect to people who have lived in this country for at least a half a decade, who don't pose criminal and security threats, and who have children who are U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents. That's a strong set of ties. It strikes me as sound immigration enforcement policy for DHS to conclude that with 11 million people to choose from as enforcement targets and the resources to remove about 400,000 of those people per year, this is a group whose presence we can reasonably allow. Fourth, I believe DHS can carry this out. There's no doubt that these programs are going to pose an operational challenge, but DHS is working from a position of several advantages. First, they've got a model in the DACA program. They put it in place pretty quickly, pretty efficiently, and they've been through the caseload in an efficient way. There's no question that this is a larger program and therefore will have much larger challenges, but that's the beauty of a fee-funded agency. With more applications come more resources to deal with those applications. Third, there's every reason, I believe, that DHS has the technological and other capacity to manage carefully the very important anti-fraud and security concerns that are going to come with a program like this. Since 9/11, there's been an explosion in the contents and the interoperability of federal, state, and even international law enforcement databases, and in the sophistication of the agency and its ability to deal with those. I understand that DHS plans to run DAPA applicants very thoroughly through their fingerprinting and background checks across several federal databases, and will be able to use this information to more effectively identify and track the people in this country. I think that'll make this country safer in the long run. I'd be very happy to address any questions that the committee has, and I appreciate, again, the opportunity to join you today.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cooper. I'll start out the round of 7 minutes of questioning. Mr. Goss, I just want to make sure I understand the assumptions that you certainly made in your actuarial assessments here. You do assume that we have the border secure and that there's interior enforcement as we would have achieved under the Senate Comprehensive Immigration Bill, correct?
Well, to a degree, we have assumed actually about half as much effectiveness on the border security as we were for S-744. Only half. There are certain features that were built into 744 that we're not aware would be part of what is going on. So,
but you assume greater border security than we have right now?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So that's not the case because we have not passed a border security bill, which, by the way, that is a top priority. This committee is finally passed. Give the American people what they've been demanding, a border security and immigration enforcement bill. That'd be handy. Mr. Connor, another assumption, I want both of you to speak to this, is this, supposedly all these people that are currently here and living in the shadows and like they're all in the underground economy, all of a sudden they come into the formal economy and now they start paying taxes. I mean, isn't it really the case that, and I don't know where we get the number on this, but how many do you think, what percentage actually are either paying tax through ITINs or actually with false Social Security numbers?
I don't know the numbers, and I don't know whether the IRS actually has the numbers either, because it tells the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration that it doesn't identify the legal status of people who file returns using ITINs. There are a large number, however, of returns that are filed using false Social Security numbers. Sometimes those are used as a vehicle for theft from the Treasury generally. Sometimes they're used just because the person wants to get a job and use a Social Security number for that and files a return using it, and it ends up not matching the Social Security Administration's records.
I mean, do you think they're kind of overestimating the number of people that really are in this underground economy that are all of a sudden going to start paying taxes, that they probably already are paying taxes?
I'm not an economist, so I don't have the ability to analyze that data, but that's certainly my impression. I'm a big consumer of economic reports, and that's certainly my impression. Millions of tax returns are filed every year using ITINs.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Blocki, I want to talk a little bit about potential document fraud. How prevalent is it? How easy is it? What kind of shortcuts are you concerned might be made because of this onslaught, this surge of applications are going to have to be handled by USCIS?
Well, it's going to be hard to tell how much fraud there is in DACA, since I mentioned that, as I understand it, FDNS, the USCIS Anti-Fraud Office, is not involved in document review for those cases at all. However, even if they were, the evidentiary standard for meeting DACA requirements is quite low. And I alluded to one. Even the formal instructions on the application say, well, we need some proof of identity. Well, you have a passport. Well, if you don't have a passport, how about a driver's license? If you don't have that, well, we'll just take anything with a photo on it. And as I alluded to before, there's emails by management that say, don't turn anyone away from biometric checks because you don't have their identity. So.
Do you have any doubt that legal immigrants that are looking to apply for different benefits through USCIS, that their applications will be put to the back burner, that some of those folks will be harmed as USCIS redeploys assets to try and take care of the surge?
Yes, indeed. In fact, I think they already have. So, as I mentioned, EADs are not being produced fast enough before people's employment authorization expires. And that's just with DACA, which had about 700,000 applications over 2 years. DAPA applications will start coming in, or expanded DACA will start coming in later this month. And by May, there may be millions of applications for DAPA, which will probably knock out a lot of the other kind of applications.
And again, in your testimony, you said there's about 18,000 total employees now, the USCIS handling about 6 million applications a year.
That's correct.
Now we're going to add 1,000 to process, nobody really knows, but probably millions, correct?
Correct.
Real quick, Mr. Goss, why would the administration be issuing permanent Social Security cards for a temporary deferred action program? And what are the implications of those permanent Social Security cards?
I really couldn't speak to the motivation of the administration on that, but our assumptions are that once people are granted this authority, as long as they are re-upped every 3 years and the executive actions stay in force, that they will be able to maintain the status. And with the SSNs that they have been provided, much as the SSNs provided to people who have temporary visas for work or education, and get those re-upped or even overstay those visas, those SSNs stay with them.
Ms. O'Connor, do you have an opinion on that in terms of why they would do that and what implication that might carry?
I find it completely perplexing. I have no explanation.
Okay. Mr. Moran, can you describe to me the basic burden of proof Customs and Border Patrol agents have when they encounter an illegal immigrant in terms of just asking them? Are there magic words that immigrants are basically trained to say to get a certain adjudication or get better treatment?
Sorry about that. I think illegal aliens that we encounter know our authority. They know the loopholes that they can exploit. And just recently, the surge we saw in South Texas, we had people that we had apprehended that had scripts on them where they would recite it and say that they claim credible fear.
So that's the magic word. Currently, you claim credible fear, and then what happens?
Eventually, they will most likely be released. As your chart showed, we're removing approximately 2.5% of them. So their end goal of what they wanted, which was to come to America, is now fulfilled at taxpayer expense.
Have you been given training in terms of how you're going to handle illegal immigrants now with the DAPA?
Yes, sir, we have. There's going to be an additional layer of checks. There's a checklist, and we will now be screening people to see if they qualify for DACA or DAPA.
Will the magic words now be, I've been here, I've been a permanent resident for more than 5 years? And then will that imply, lack of action?
I believe it will be. I think the claims will be made. I don't know if Border Patrol agents or CBP officers will be the ones that are then adjudicating whether or not a document is authentic and whether they qualify under this program. But that is a concern we have.
What will you do as Border Patrol agent when an illegal immigrant says, no, I've been here, 6 or 7 years? What exactly, how will that affect your actions?
Well, Senator, we have a checklist, and it's pretty simple, and it's a yes or no checklist. And sorry, I have to find here. It says, has he or she resided continuously in the United States since January 1st, 2010? If we check yes, I don't know if that means they qualify. Personally, I don't feel it's my decision to make. I think somebody above my pay
But I mean,
grade
you
needs
just,
to make that
will
decision.
you just let them go?
Personally, I would not. I would put that decision on one of my supervisors.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator Carper.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Again, our thanks to all of you for your willingness to stick around to answer our questions. A long time ago, I was a naval flight officer and served as in the Navy for about 23 years all in. And I remember being in Southeast Asia on one of our tours and going in with my commanding officer, and he had on the wall a cartoon that he'd had enlarged, and it was a cartoon, and you may have seen this in your own lives, where a guy is on a desert island, or it looks like to be a desert island, by himself. There's one tree on the island. He's surrounded by alligators trying to get him, and he's trying to climb up the tree to get away. And the caption under the cartoon was, "It's hard to remember that our job was to drain the swamp when we're up to our eyeballs in alligators." Think about that. I've had the privilege as chairman of this committee the last couple of years to go down to, not just to the border of Mexico. The chairman and I think Senator Sass are going to go down there very soon again. But I've also had a chance to go to Mexico, to Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, to Colombia, to try to understand why people would literally risk life and limb to try to travel 1,500 miles through Mexico for an uncertain future here. Why would people do that? And the reason why is because they're living in hellholes, in many cases, in Honduras, Guatemala, and Salvador. I'll just tell you one quick story. We have a number of Guatemalans who've come to Delmarva Peninsula over the years to be part of the poultry industry. And when we had an influx of new young people into our country a year or so ago, a few more came into southern Delaware from Guatemala. And they were helped in part by Catholic Charities and by an outfit called La Esperanza, which means hope. Among the young people he talked to a guy who's 15 years old from Guatemala and his 13-year-old sister. And he ended up here, and here's how he ended up here. He was asked by a gang in Guatemala in his community to join the gang. He said, "I'm not interested." They asked him again a little while later. He said, "I'm not interested." They asked him again. He said, "I'm not interested." They said, "You don't join, we're going to kill somebody in your family." He joined the gang. Part of his initiation requirement was to rape his 13-year-old sister. He told his parents, the two of them, a week later with a coyote on their way to our country. Most of the people coming into the border these days aren't coming from Mexico. There's as many people almost last year going from the U.S. into Mexico as from coming Mexico into the U.S. The reason why so many people are coming from Guatemala, Honduras, and Salvador to this country is because they lack hope, they lack opportunity. Their businesses are shut down by extortion, gangs, a lot of the crime that we inspire by virtue of our dependence on drugs. We're a big part of the cause of that. And most of the people that are coming from those three countries that are coming to our border, they're not slipping through. They're basically turning themselves in and saying, I want to have a safe place to live and to work. We spent $250 billion, $250 billion in the last 10 years beefing up our border security. And is it more secure? You bet it is. Is it perfect? No, it's not. Well, rather than continue to spend another $250 billion in the next 10 years, we only spent 1%, not even 1% of that, to try to say, how do we help make the lives of the people in Guatemala, Salvador, and Honduras durable? Something that they can endure so they have some hope. And rather than just feel they have to go to someplace else, why can't they be comfortable and say, I want to live here, I want to raise my family here? Fortunately, the presidents of those three countries have put together something like Plan Colombia. And it's a good blueprint, and it calls for addressing the root causes, lack of rule of law, cost of energy, workforce, any number of things where they need to do a better job. And it's like in Home Depot, where they say in Home Depot, you can do it, we can help. Well, they can do it, but we need help. Not just us, Mexico, Colombia, Inter-American Development Banks, all kinds of people, nonprofits. We can all help. And if we spend the next 10 years saying, God, we've got to strengthen the borders more, we've got to do more to strengthen the borders, and we don't address the underlying root causes, we have wasted a lot of money. And we'll end up, as one of you said, I don't think it was Sean, I think it was maybe you, quoted Albert Einstein, keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect the same result. Well, that applies to this as well. So I would ask that we keep that in mind. The other thing I want to do in terms of a question, I want to deal with, we talked about the economic impacts of the deportation programs, GDP growth, that sort of thing, reductions in the cost of spending. I want to ask a couple of questions, one for you, Mr. Goss, and then maybe one for Mr. Cooper. But I think in your testimony, Mr. Goss, your testimony addresses some of these economic effects we mentioned earlier. You calculate that the program will boost GDP by, I think you said, $43 billion over 10 years and more after that. What is driving that growth? What is driving that growth, please?
Well, driving the growth in the gross domestic product itself, and the important distinction here, as the numbers are developed for estimating gross domestic product by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Department of Commerce, GDP is not dependent on people working in the above-ground economy. People who are undocumented and people who are working in the underground economy, whether they're documented or not, also contributed towards the estimated GDP. So we do estimate that the gross domestic product is affected by our population as a whole. And as I mentioned, people, even who are undocumented, we assume that they will, at any given age and sex, be as likely to be working and contributing towards gross domestic product. Our estimates of the implications of these executive actions as a whole would be that it will grow our population at working age to a greater extent. And there are especially some features in here which we don't focus on that much, like the entrepreneurs, expected to be about 10,000 per year additional coming in, which would significantly contribute towards the extra workforce and the extra people that are working and contributing towards our GDP.
Let me ask a follow-up to that. You studied the financial impacts on the Social Security system specifically. I think you told us you concluded that the deferred deportation programs would have a modest but a net positive impact on the system. Why is that so? Just explain to us, why is that so?
Well, the reason for it is because the large majority of the people who would be additionally coming in and being covered under Social Security would actually be newly paying taxes. We estimate that of the people who would be paying into the Social Security system, in addition, that only about 15% initially of those who would be newly covered workers under these deferred actions and the other features would be people who were going to what we call our suspense file. That is, people who had, in effect, maybe made up a 9-digit number and were paying taxes in already. That about 85% initially would be people who are working in the underground economy or would be new people coming to the country like the entrepreneurs and would be paying additional taxes. By the time we get up to 2050, we estimate that the implications will be at more like 10% of the additional workers will be people would be from where they would already have been paying taxes through some other means. So the bottom line is that the additional people coming in at relatively young ages will, for 2 to 3 decades, be paying taxes into the system. That'll be to the plus. I think the CBO estimates indicated the same in their 10-year projections. Following that, of course, there's the other side. As this group ages, they will have then earned the right to get benefits, and we will pay out benefits. It turns out to be a very close call and essentially a wash with a very, very small positive. It's basically neutral over the 75-year projection horizon.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Carper, and I want to thank the witnesses today for sharing your perspectives and expertise. I believe that the deferred action programs that we're discussing today constitute an important step in trying to address our broken immigration system. It will give individuals, families, and employers greater certainty, ensure that more workers are paying taxes and paying into Medicare and Social Security, and allow individuals who contribute to our communities and our economy, in many cases people have been doing so for years, even decades, to come out of the shadows. But make no mistake, these programs, in my opinion, are at best a short-term step because Congress must act. We must act on a comprehensive, permanent reform to our immigration laws. And we've talked already about the fact that the Senate passed such a measure during the last Congress, and while it was not perfect by any means, I voted for it because it's critical to our nation and our economy that we fix the broken system. It's because of that belief that I am frustrated by my colleagues who have chosen to play politics as we consider the Homeland Security Department's funding bill. It puts critical national security programs on the line in order to play out this attack on the President's actions on immigration. And we're having this important hearing today in which we can learn more about making DACA and DAPA work best for our country and our economy, while at the same time, Republican leaders of this chamber are trying to undo these very programs on the Senate floor this week. This is a very important conversation about the economic benefits of making our immigration system work, and I'm glad we're having it. And I hope that all of my colleagues will listen closely so we can get back to working together to advance real and lasting reform in our, that our economy and our communities desperately need. Now, I want to turn to the panel to help us further that discussion. I wanted to start with Mr. Cooper. In your testimony, you outlined some of the estimates from the Council on Economic Advisors, the Congressional Budget Office on the fiscal impacts of these deferred action programs. We heard from Mr. Goss regarding the Social Security Administration's estimates on the impact on the Social Security Trust Fund. From your review of these and other assessments of potential impact of these programs, have you found sources that indicate that they would have a negative impact on our economy?
There certainly are economists who take varying positions on immigration in general. The sources that I've seen, indicate a positive result.
And didn't the Congressional Budget Office actually conclude that eliminating these programs would be a fiscal negative?
Absolutely, a very, very large-scale fiscal negative to the tune of an increase in the federal deficit by $7.5 billion over the coming 10 years.
Mr. Cooper, you've seen the implementation of the original DACA program, which has been in place now for more than 2 years. The Department of Homeland Security has outlined the new resources and personnel that it will put in place to administer DACA and DAPA. I'm wondering, in your opinion, do you believe that the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services will be able to effectively administer these new programs?
I do believe that. They have, the immigration agencies are built to have a capacity to scale because immigration flows and immigration policies evolve. And so that's a dynamic that the agencies have had to contend with always. And as I mentioned before, it's a dynamic that they're especially well equipped to contend with because they get more resources as more applications come in. Resources are statutorily required to match adjudications demands. In addition, their technological sophistication and their technological relationships, database, data sharing information, data sharing relationships with law enforcement elsewhere in the federal government at the state level is far more sophisticated than it ever was, and their anti-fraud abilities are far more sophisticated than they have ever been. I understand that FDS is very much engaged in the planning of DACA expansion and DAPA implementation, that they've been involved in interactions with other governments to get document templates, with schools to get exemplars for enrollment materials and all the similar kinds of documentation that would be analyzed to evaluate eligibility. I think they'll face some challenges, of course, but yes, I think they're well equipped to implement these changes.
You just mentioned the ability to focus in on fraud. And by that, I interpret, somebody trying to defraud the U.S. government. Right. One of the things I've heard from immigration groups is the concern for potential unscrupulous lawyers and notarios who take advantage of the people who are going through the application process. Can you tell me what your experience was in addressing that type of fraud at the INS, and what advice you would have to help us prevent applicants from for these programs from being taken advantage of?
Yes, that's actually an issue that has, I think, a couple of related dimensions. One with respect to notarios, representatives here in the U.S., and the other with respect to smugglers and the issue that Officer Moran and the chairman were discussing. And they're very closely related. With respect to fraud, and unscrupulous representatives, that's an issue that the agencies have been focused on, including the Department of Justice. They bear a very strong role in trying to attack representative fraud for years, and it's gotten better and stronger. There are more significant requirements to qualify as a representative. There are increasingly strict representations that you have to make as a preparer of materials, and there's increased law enforcement vigilance against notarios. And there's a very strong ability as well for the community to report information about this kind of misuse. So I believe that's a very important problem to keep focused on, but one that the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security do have a strong focus on. They also have a lot of anti-fraud measures in place along the lines that we discussed before. The standard of proof, someone who comes forward and requests deferred action has to demonstrate their eligibility, and the standard of proof is more likely than not. Same standard that would apply if any of us sued each other in the courts. There are criminal and other penalties in place for people who make misrepresentations to the government in order to gain advantages under the immigration statute. So the tools are there. Again, it's a large-scale program. It'll pose challenges, but the tools, I believe, are there. If I could just mention briefly the related issue of abuse, not just by representatives, but also by smugglers. I agree very much with, I understand Officer Moran's frontline experience, and I agree with the concern he expressed that there are people who are engaged in facilitating unlawful migration of this country that are very sophisticated in their ability to help people game the system. And there's no question that there are smugglers who try to take advantage of that. But to take, for example, the scenario that we were concerned with before, that someone appears at the border and says, I've been here for 5 years. First of all, in my experience, Border Patrol members tend to have highly refined experience and instincts in these situations and would be able to see through false statements and examine them. But even if they were to take such a statement at face value, the way the programs are structured, DAPA relief is unavailable to anyone who falls within any of the enforcement priorities, and in the very highest tier of the removal priorities is the category of people who are apprehended while crossing the border.
Senator Heitkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just for a moment examine the chart that the chairman released. If somebody could put that up. And my question is for anyone on the panel, as we look at the increase in undocumented children across the border, what percentage of those in 2014 would be eligible for the relief in this program that we talked about? Mr. Balaki, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I just want to kind of better understand, because I think the implication is that DACA was announced, and obviously that led to a 2014 increase in the unaccompanied minors. Now, I could make an argument that that might have had more to do with the conditions that Ranking Member Carper talked about, and also the anti-trafficking laws that were passed that gave free entry to people from Central America. But isn't it true that no one who crosses the border in 14 is eligible for this program? Isn't that true?
I understand that is correct. Yeah.
So and it might be driven by false knowledge of what's happening or an impression about what's happening, but no one crossing the border in 14 who was caught crossing the border in 14 would be eligible. Is that correct? Mr. Moran?
Yeah, unless they fell under a DAPA program, if they were a parent of a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident, they might be able to qualify, but not children.
Yeah, could I just offer that I think the rules for the new DACA are that people have to have entered the country before sometime in June of 2010. So people who have entered after June of 2010, which are these people, would not qualify under the extension of DACA.
That would be correct. And also, if we drew a line in November, when the president announced the expansion, and then took a look at when most of those unaccompanied minors crossed the border, it would be early in the spring, during the civil unrest in El Salvador and Honduras. Is that not correct? Anyone?
Well, I'll just mention that the regulations for DAPA haven't actually been issued yet, so the thresholds and requirements we're not clear what they are yet.
I have no doubt, and I think we saw that in the spring, that there's a combination of issues that drive this kind of rush to the border, and one of which I share, Mr. Moran, your concern about updating border strategy and taking a look at what actually is going to work. I've had a fair amount of opportunity to spend time on the border, some officially, some unofficially, meet with ranchers, meet with farmers who are encountering this every day, very concerned about the safety of their family. We know that. I'm very concerned about the safety of your officers as we move forward with border security. And, you know, I will say that this is the wrong way for Congress to adopt policy. There's no one, I don't think any one of you on this panel can say this is the right discussion to be having, whether it is, you know, politicizing the Department of Homeland Security because of an executive order, or whether it is ignoring true, honest to goodness border concerns and border issues that we have, and taking a look at doing the right thing that's going to discourage policy long-term, policy to cross the border illegally long-term. And so the frustration that I have is that there's tons of challenges in all of this, and comprehensive immigration reform, comprehensive border security analysis is what we need, not you know, politicizing this issue. And if I can just, Ms. O'Connor, you may not know this, but I used to be the tax commissioner in North Dakota. And I spent a lot of time dealing with tax fraud and schemes, and during my time it was all those horrible people in prison who were filing false returns, and actually IRS was issuing refunds to people who were felons and had been locked up for 20, 30 years.
They still do.
Right. So as we're analyzing this, the concern that I have about the IRS goes way beyond the potential for abusing the child tax credit, the potential for abusing the earned income tax credit. It goes to an antiquated system that should be immediately be able to indicate and catch when you're mailing a refund to one address that numbers in the millions. That shouldn't happen in any kind of automated system.
24,000 checks to a single address in a single year should have raised somebody's suspicion.
Right, and so we're talking about this in the context of border security, when I'm saying we need to take a look at what the IRS doesn't do in terms of automating their system to prevent that from happening, whether it's checks to prisons, whether it is unmatched Social Security numbers and tax identification numbers to actual work product. I mean, these are issues that the IRS could solve with the right amount of resources and the right amount of attention. And so, I question whether we should be just focusing on the challenges that these kinds of frauds present as a result of illegal immigration. Mr. Moran, it looked like you wanted
Would the senator from North Dakota yield for just for a quick clarification? The problem that's been raised here, 24,000 checks sent to a single address. IRS has changed the rules to allow only 3 checks to a single address or account. So,
Yeah.
message heard.
But I will tell you this, that for every time you think you've closed this kind of opportunity, another opportunity will open, and the IRS needs to be more vigilant as we look at a system that I think encourages a rapid refund. We're getting more and more automated, and we're very proud that we can turn around refunds and get them in people's bank accounts, but maybe we ought to take a pause and take a look at what we're giving up in terms of security of the system for a rapid turnaround. Mr. Moran, you looked like you wanted to offer a comment.
When you were asking us, Senator, who qualifies for this, I think one of our concerns is that the messaging on the training from CBP has been inconsistent at best. It says that the presidential priorities, level 1, aliens apprehended at the border or ports of entry while attempting to unlawfully enter the United States. And then in the same document, it says the impact of DACA and DAPA on CBP. It says ICE and CBP are instructed to immediately begin identifying persons in their custody, as well as newly encountered individuals who meet the above criteria and may thus be eligible for deferred action to prevent the further expenditure of enforcement resources with regard to these individuals. If we're encountering people, the vast majority of people that Border Patrol agents encounter are newly arrived in this country illegally. Our concern is that this will be watered down and that these people who should be ineligible will somehow be made eligible.
And if in fact that happens, I would share your concern. But at this point, based on what I understand the program to be, those folks currently crossing would not be eligible. If I could just, one additional question for Mr. Moran, because I believe that the officers' voices at the border should be heard. I believe that your points of view in terms of training, absolutely agree. Really appreciate that you mentioned the northern border, being from North Dakota, being understaffed. And I just want to, the one thing that you did say that I want to explore a little bit was that you think that there should be border protection agents in Phoenix. Where do you see the boundary between ICE and border protection? And wouldn't, I mean, I could make an argument that at the Phoenix location, that's ICE's responsibility, correct?
It's a very difficult line to demarcate. Our former chief, David Aguilar, had delegated that authority in an MOU to ICE that they would have the primary interior enforcement capabilities. We both have the same authority. Our opinion is that both agencies should be working to secure the United States, whether that be at the border or at the interior. Unfortunately, in the past several years, policy within CBP has restricted the ability of Border Patrol agents to work at these transportation hubs. And it seems that any enforcement activity that is successful is restricted. And we're now looking at the possibility of our checkpoints disappearing, for lack of a better term, because they have been successful. And that would basically cede the egress routes from the border into the interior of the United States. So to answer your question, I don't know where the line is, but somebody needs to be working in the interior. And in our opinion, ICE doesn't have the resources or the institutional priorities to go after that. And I think that's very evident in their rebranding of some of their agents from ICE agents to Homeland Security Investigations. The immigration seems to have been forgotten in their title.
Okay, thank you.
Before I call on Senator Langford, I think at least twice, maybe three times now, we've heard the charge, and I want to add a little balance to the conversation here that somebody's politicizing the funding of DHS. The fact is, yesterday we held a vote to proceed to debate on the DHS funding bill. I think every Democrat voted against proceeding to that debate. I mean, if we want to have an honest debate, I think that's the way to do it, is on the floor of the Senate, allow an open amendment process, and let's actually debate the issue. But the Democrats denied that cloture vote. So if there's a charge of politicization, I think we need to take at least a look at the facts. Senator Langford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks all for being here as well in the conversation of it. I was in Central America last September, and to go back to this chart as well and some of the conversation on it, led a bipartisan delegation there, met with individuals from the government, from our government, from resident governments, from the embassies and others, to be able to visit and ask some specific questions. Why did we see this big surge? Was in Guatemala, was in Honduras, was in El Salvador. All three countries, we heard the exact same thing. There are push and pulls. The push are the gang violence and the lack of jobs and all those things. But all of them came back and said the spark, the pull, was DACA. That when DACA went through, the coyotes in Central America spread the word that if you get to the United States right now and you're a minor, you can stay. And the reality of the number of adults that were already here and the connection that we have with the children that are crossing unaccompanied, connecting with a parent typically, in some statistics 80 to 85% of the children that were coming already had a parent in the United States. that when they came and were connected, those children, I heard over and over again, when they got to the United States, were posting on their Facebook page a picture of them holding up their notice to appear in court saying, I have legal papers, telling all their friends, come. Now, my question is, to follow up on Senator Heitkamp's, how many of those individuals that we've seen from 2012, 13, and 14 have been returned back to their home country? Now, we talked before how many were eligible. How many of those folks had been returned? They came illegally across the border. They were moved to the interior. Does anyone know the percentage of returns there?
James, it's actually on the bottom of the graph here. Again, it's not certain, but we got this, I think, from an LA Times report.
Correct.
It's very difficult to get the information.
It is very difficult because no one's answering back and forth on it from any of the agencies. I can tell you when I've talked to the different agents, the different folks, the numbers that I get are no higher at any time than 5%. That 80% plus don't show up for their notice to appear, and those that do often are given some sort of deferred ability to be able to stay. And so while we can debate about are they going to be returned, do they have legal status, they're here. They're not being returned. And so they're back into what Officer Moran was talking about before. They're living in the shadows, knowing if I stay here long enough, as has already been seen, the previous DACA was only for 2007, and then a year later it was extended to 2010. And the assumption is from every coyote in Central America, get there as fast as you can. They'll keep moving the target. So that's the challenge that we face at this point. Is I understand what it says. That's not what's happening. And everyone in Central America is telling us that over and over again. And we have to be able to resolve this on what do we do here. So let me ask just a couple quick questions. What data, does anyone know what data are we getting for background checks for these individuals going through DACA and through DAPA from Central American countries? Are we getting, when we do a background check, are we getting information on that individual from El Salvador, from Honduras, from Nicaragua, from Panama, from Venezuela, on the activities of that individual while they were in that country?
I interviewed a number of people regarding background checks when I prepared for this testimony, and I asked that question, how many background checks, or will the background checks really check foreign country criminal background? And the only answer I got was that FBI does have relationship with Interpol. They may have red flag notices and things like that, but that really is talking about mainly Western European countries and high-profile criminals.
So if we have an individual coming to the United States from Venezuela, they've stayed here long enough, at this point we're not checking Venezuelan records to find out what happened, what they did in that country to be able to have some sort of legal status here?
Not to my knowledge.
Does DHS require in their new guidelines the processing or payment of taxes before they can go through this? Are they being required, is DHS requiring before you can get legal status that they pay back taxes?
Well, with DAPA, again, the regulations aren't out, but I understand that is one of the requirements. Perhaps my colleague can answer that better.
It's not a requirement under DACA. And as my colleague says, the DAPA regulations aren't out yet. But no, there is no requirement that taxes already have been paid.
Senator, my understanding is that if anyone is given deferred action under the program, then they'll be able to get a Social Security number, and then tax compliance can be enforced, and that previous tax behavior can be a positive or negative discretionary factor, and that discretion is something that the officers are instructed to observe.
But at that point, they already have all their legal paperwork. So you're saying they get legal paperwork and they're told you should pay back taxes?
I think that whether or not, I think their past tax behavior, whether they paid taxes or not, is something that can be considered discretionarily for up or down in the process of deciding whether to give deferred action, but that once you get deferred action, then you've got Social Security number and tax compliance can be fully enforced.
DHS does not require, before they give deferred action to an individual, that they pay back taxes before they get that deferred action. That is not a requirement.
I don't believe that's a requirement.
So it's not a requirement that they do a background check in a home country. It's not a requirement that they pay back taxes before they get deferred action.
DHS would have to supply you with the more precise information about what happens between the law enforcement authorities and other governmental authorities of the sending countries and ours. But my strong understanding is that, especially ever since these spikes, that there's been a great deal of interaction in those countries with law enforcement there between not just Department of Homeland Security, but Justice Department and other law enforcement
No,
entities.
the spike, as I can tell you from being in Central America and asking some of those questions, the spike is for the individuals that we're returning, that we're trying to verify before they return to home country, who is this individual? And those are typically adults. Obviously, adults typically, as the Border Patrol agent can tell us on that have said, I want to voluntarily return, because if you get to the border and you're picked up and you're apprehended and you say, I want to voluntarily return, it cleans your record up. The Coyotes in Central America, as we talked to everyone there, said they're now doing a 3-for-1 deal. You pay $4,000, and they'll give you 3 attempts to be able to get in the United States. If you're picked up the first 2 times, say I want to voluntarily return, they'll bring you back. Literally, they meet you at the bus station when you return and start the return trip again. So for one amount, they can do 3 times there. As long as you keep saying voluntarily return, there's no strike on your record. You just keep coming until you actually penetrate the system. So that's part of the challenge. It's getting us off topic on this, though. The individuals that come in to register for DACA and DAPA, and DHS determines they're not eligible for this program, what happens to those individuals? They have come in and said, I'm not legally in this country. I'd like to get some sort of deferred status. For whatever that percentage may be, what happens to those individuals?
Well, one thing that happens is, at that point, DHS has all their information under circumstances where they didn't before. And then I think the second is that applying the removal priorities that were set out in a revised form in November, DHS would then make a decision whether or not to add that person to the removal.
So they may say they're not eligible to have deferred status, but they also may say you're not, you can also stay here just in the shadows.
That's
right. Up to their discretion. So they've already said, I'm in this country illegally. I'm not eligible for deferred status. That's just been determined, but it's also you can stay. It's also under their purview to be able to do.
It's not you can stay, it's rather I'm going to spend my enforcement efforts on higher priorities.
And you stay.
That's right, but the nature of the determination is a different one.
But the result for that individual is the same.
Then they'd be part of the millions of people who are subject to removal, but not within the removal resources of the Department of Homeland Security, which is, I think, one more argument in favor of legislative reform.
And one more argument why Agent Moran and his counterparts have such tough morale issues in trying to face the issues of what they try to do. I yield back.
Senator Booker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just, as Senator Baldwin had said, I just want to express my frustration and concern, whether it's politics or not. The reality is last year we passed a spending bill for every other department agency in the United States of America, but separated one out, the Department of Homeland Security. And the stated reason was over immigration issues. But as a guy who has stood in my city and watched the terrorist attacks across the river, as a guy who has one of the third busiest port in my state, as a person who has seen Hurricane Sandy sweep through, kill people in my state, the fact that now, whatever reason, politics or not, we didn't include in last year as part of the omnibus, the Department of Homeland Security, we now, in our inability to pass a bill, has now put at risk many of the issues and concerns that we're briefly touching on here, which is the safety and the security of our nation, whether it's the nuclear detection equipment that needs to be upgraded at my port, whether it is issues related to coordination of personnel. All of this right now is in jeopardy, and we wouldn't do this with the Department of Defense. But somehow the Department of Homeland Security, which is our buffer and often the preventative agency for the safety and security, whether it's from natural disaster. And by the way, I'm concerned because the fund necessary to respond to wildfires, to floods, to hurricanes is all now in jeopardy because we're not moving forward. Whether it's politics or not, I don't know, but I know we have the leadership that should be able to address what are the common concerns of our country. These issues are really important, and Sean Moran, I want to thank you, not only for having the best haircut in that panel, but I want to thank you, sir. You and the people you represent do this country a great service. You are honorable and, from my experience, courageous in what you all face every day. And it's your testimony, I think, in some ways is the most important testimony here. We're not doing enough to support you, to give you the resources you need. And as a guy who oversaw a municipal law enforcement agency, when you don't support your officers in the proper way, you put them at risk. And a lot of the things that you brought out in your written testimony and your spoken testimony really was important for my staff. And things that I know are important, like the ratio of supervisors. You guys are a lot of supervisors, it seems, but not enough folks that are actually doing the field. And these are things that we should pay attention to and react to. So I want to thank you and just compliment you on the record, because I know from personal experience how important the work you do, and you stand out there. The only small issue, and for me it's not a small issue, and I think that Senator Langford, who I really appreciate actually having gone down to Central America to see for himself what was going on, he talked about the push and the pull factors. You really don't have the resources to know if somebody's telling the truth or not. And the one thing you said about these folks having written scripts before them about what to say, just because a person has a written script and has practiced that script, kind of like the five of you have done preparing for this, doesn't mean that they're not sincere people and really facing a threat. Is that correct?
That's correct. We do spend a lot of time when we apprehend people, because obviously when it's busy, it's going to take quite a bit of time to transport them. So obviously you're going to talk with them. And we've even had our intelligence people interview them, and I believe it was 6 or 7 out of 10 claimed it was because of DACA, rumors of immigration reform, Amnesty, and the like, that they were coming here. There were those that claimed violence, economic conditions, but by and large, the majority was because they had heard from somebody else that was released into American society.
No, I really appreciate that, and I imagine what you're saying, there's a lot of veracity to that. But there are people that are escaping violence and rape and torture. And, and as we see and have encouraged other people to do right now, Jordan, we're telling them, hey, take people into your country that are coming from Syria, and the way that Canada has stepped up to help. This is a nation that has a history that when people are being persecuted, that we do something for them. You understand that, correct?
I do. I would add, though, that the incentive for people to come here to this country puts our members at risk. We've had 120 agents die in the line of duty. The majority of them have been since I became a Border Patrol agent. So the trend is definitely increasing, that it's more dangerous.
And just because I'm losing time, I agree with that point very well. Real quick, Mr. Cooper, you talked about the tremendous economic benefits that have been put forth by a non-political organization called the Congressional Budget Office, the boom to our economy. You talked about $90 billion. You talked about money off of the national debt, which concerns me. You talked about the improving of the social safety net, greater contributions. The one thing you didn't mention is jobs. Jobs for Americans. If you're driving an economy, increasing GDP, if you're having more entrepreneurs, is there a job benefit to expanding job opportunities for the United States for Americans as well?
I think that the Council of Economic Advisors also concluded in its report that with the economic expansion that would come with DACA and DAPA, there would also be a job expansion, and their conclusion was that these programs would help, not harm, American workers in searching for jobs.
Right, and you get more entrepreneurs in our country under a legal pathway. You're increasing a lot of economic benefits. One is job creation as well.
Right.
You know, I appreciate the law enforcement aspects you said. As a guy, again, who was frustrated as mayor that I could not get undocumented immigrants to come forward. There's fear coming forward and reporting crimes, cooperating with the police. It was very, very difficult, and also victimized by crimes because people singled them out. I appreciate you speaking to the law enforcement. The last question I just want to ask, to be respectful of the time, and I'm still trying to get in good with the new chairman. Real quickly, the child tax credit. The idea is that if you have a child, right, that is a U.S. citizen, you may not be a documented immigrant, you may not have citizenship, but the idea is that for an American child to claim that credit, right, is we don't want, just because to punish a child just for having undocumented parents, right? And the way this is structured, the claim of the child care tax credit is really to get money and have a more stable household for that child. Is that correct?
It's to benefit the child. My understanding is that that tax credit and the earned income tax credit effects were taken into account in the CBO's estimate of the effects of the effects that elimination of DACA and DAPA would have on the federal deficit.
So you still get the economic benefits, doesn't diminish that, as the estimates the CBO was doing, and American children who may have undocumented parents have more food on the table, are better prepared to go to school, and have the benefits of the resources that tax credit is intended to do, and have a better start in life. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate your stylish haircut, but you still went over time. But we won't write it down.
I assert to you, I will try to get better, sir.
Senator Ayotte.
I want to thank the chairman. I want to thank all of our witnesses that are here. First of all, I would like to follow up Ms. O'Connor on the additional child tax credit issue, because I know that Senator Booker had just made the point that if you're, if you're an American child, but you're the child of an illegal immigrant, that this is something that you should receive. But as I understand it, the Treasury IG has done a lot of look at the not only the additional child tax credit, but the earned income tax credit. And one of the issues is that right now, some people did some individual work and studies on that tax credit as well. And there are people being claimed for that tax credit, children that don't even live in this country. In other words, because right now you can seek that tax credit whether or not you have a Social Security number for the recipient or the child. So can you speak a little bit about some of the fraud we've seen in the additional child tax credit?
Certainly, you're exactly right. The studies have shown that, the Inspector General's studies have shown that tens of billions of dollars are paid every year with respect to children who might not exist at all, and if they do, they might live in a foreign country. One of the requirements is that the child is supposed to live with the person who is claiming the credit, but the IRS does not really have the wherewithal or maybe the motivation to confirm that that's the case. So while it's very nice to think that the additional child tax credit is going to give some worthy kid more Cheerios in the morning and make sure he gets to school on time, that's not necessarily the way it's working out.
Yeah, and I think that most Americans would be very troubled to think that we're giving refundable tax money that's all of the taxpayer dollars to
Right, and
fraudulent situations.
If I might just emphasize, as you said, you think of a refund as getting something back that you've paid, but this is not that. This is getting something back that you haven't paid.
Correct. Because based on what you're eligible, you haven't paid it, but because it's an income eligibility issue, and you get that, and it's $1,000, I believe, or more per
Right,
child.
it's a welfare program operated through the Internal Revenue Code.
So one of the questions I also wanted to follow up on, so under DACA and DAPA, and let me just say for the record, I'm someone who supported the immigration reform bill. I want to solve this problem. But as I look at these executive orders, we're in a position where some of the things that I thought were very important in that bill, like the people that were patiently waiting in line, getting the individuals that were here illegally getting to the back of the line as a matter of fairness, the back tax issues, a matter of fairness, a whole host of provisions on securing our border that were incredibly important in that. And as I look at these executive orders, we're in a situation, we've talked about the additional child tax credit, but I want to put in perspective for people how much money that is to the Treasury. As we got the last figures, which we were able to get, which were actually 2011, $30 billion going out each year on the additional child tax credit. The other big refundable tax credit that we all need to understand is the earned income tax credit. And the earned income tax credit is also a refundable tax credit, like the additional child tax credit. Right now, to receive that tax credit, you have to have a Social Security number. Is that right, Ms. O'Connor?
Yes, Senator.
And so these individuals under this executive order, as far as I can see, are immediately getting Social Security numbers. And with that immediate receipt of Social Security numbers, do we have any sense of the numbers? We're already paying out $65 billion a year on this earned income tax credit. How many more billions are we going to spend, are going to go out on the earned income tax credit for people who, by the way, are immediately getting Social Security numbers, are, of course, you know, not getting in the back of the line of the people who are diligently waiting here. And so do we have a sense of what those numbers are?
I don't have that number. Maybe one of my colleagues at the table does, but I'll also remind everyone that the Internal Revenue Service interpretation of these provisions is that you get the credit not just this year, but you can file amended returns for the prior 3 years. So everybody who gets a Social Security number now, multiply that by 4 to get the total impact this year.
Oh, I hadn't appreciated. So if I get a Social Security number immediately, there's millions of people that will receive this, then you could file back, presumably, for 3 years.
That's how the IRS interprets the rule, right?
And by the way, we've talked about fraud in the ACTC. As I understand it, we have an improper payment rate overall, even in the earned income tax credit, of 22 to 26%.
That's right. That's what the Inspector General says.
So I want to make sure that as we look at all of this, we think about the prior 3 years. One of the things I see in the executive orders is that it's not clear. Does anyone know that it says that you'd be eligible for Social Security benefits, Mr. Goss, with a 10 years of work history, as I understand it? Do we know what counts for work history? So if someone was here illegally and working, could they use that work as their 10-year history and then immediately be eligible for Social Security benefits as well?
That's an extremely good question, and many people have raised this issue, that people who have, in the primary potential source for that would be people who have been here on an undocumented form, but have been working with their employer and have been paying in the taxes, but not with what we call a match between their name and a Social Security number, because they have not been issued a Social Security number. In theory, if they can come to our offices and prove with pay stubs or whatever that, in fact, those were their earnings in the past, they could reclaim those earnings. In practice, this is a rare event. We estimate that about 7% of all of the earnings that go to our earnings suspense file, because names and SSNs don't match, only about 7% is ever reclaimed. And the vast majority of that is it could be any one of us where our employer might have messed up our SSN when they submitted the numbers. So very little of that we expect will be going on in the future, as very little has gone on in the past. So our estimates of the number of people receiving benefits, and from what I understand, CBO has done mostly the same, is based largely on earnings that people will have going forward, developing their insured status. And Senator Ayotte, you're exactly right. For retirement benefits, you have to have 10 years worth or 40 quarters of coverage. You can gain insured status if you're younger if you were to die, a survivor's benefit or a disability benefit with less work time than that. But again, relatively few people we expect will be actually achieving that in the relatively near term. And we have estimates in our testimony that show you year by year how many.
There are, I think, a lot of questions that are raised by all this on how it's going to work. And, I'm certainly, Mr. Moran, thank you for your work and many questions raised for those who do serve and defend our nation and help us with the borders. And so I think this is one of the issues and challenges you face when something's done by executive order versus laws that are in place, and also for these individuals who are going to be in this status, what is the permanency of it? And I think that is why legislation is the way that we should do these things, and why I've been someone who's been trying to solve this problem, and I'm very disappointed that the President, has decided to take executive action on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Ayotte. I've just got a couple other questions. And again, just to quick bring balance to some of the comments made. We would not be discussing DHS funding today had President Obama not taken the unilateral executive action. We would have probably passed an omnibus through the end of this fiscal year. So that's the reason DHS funding is up in the air at this point in time. And again, just yesterday, the way to address this DHS funding would actually be to put a bill on the floor and open it up to debate. We were denied cloture on that, not Republicans. That was basically Democrats just decided not to allow us to proceed to debate on the bill. I'm not quite sure why, but that's just a fact. Mr. Goss, I've got a actuarial note that you issued in April of 2013 to kind of answer the question that I was asking Ms. O'Connor about how many of the immigrant population, what percent is actually in the underground economy. Back then, you were saying about 3.9 million of 8.3 million, so less than half were actually in the underground economy. More than half then actually were paying into the system in some way, shape, or form, either with a illegal Social Security number or through the ITIN. Is that about what your estimates were in this current?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
It's actually a little bit higher than that at this point, because back at our estimates, back at the time of 2009 and 2010, we still had a significant number of people in the undocumented population who had, prior to 2001, when things were really tightened up about being able to get issued an SSN after birth, prior to that time, people could come in with perhaps not legitimate documentation and relatively easily get an SSN. After a specific time of 2001 that we all too well remember, especially Senator Booker, that has been tightened up, and we see a much diminished number of people getting SSNs illegitimately.
So there are more people or less people in the underground economy versus 2013?
We would say a larger share of the workers who are in the undocumented population now are in the underground economy.
Okay.
And if I might just add on that one little thing, since you all are so important in terms of tax policy, one of the biggest issues I would hope that you all would pay attention to would be the fact that, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis of the Department of Commerce, 1/2 of all of the compensation to independent contractors and self-employed individuals in this country is not reported for tax purposes. Now, that's obviously not all from undocumented individuals, but there's an awful lot of non-reporting
Right.
of income, and that would make a big difference if all of that income was reported for payroll taxes to Social Security and Medicare, as well as.
But again, that's kind of beside the issue.
That's a different thing.
Okay. So I do want to explore the assumptions and the estimates in terms of this being a boon to our GDP. Now, I certainly understand, because I come from the private sector, that the way, what makes up an economy is human capital combined with the financial capital, and that's what drives an economy. So you need, when you increase the supply of human capital, through bursts and through immigration, that will increase the size of GDP. What puzzles me about the estimates coming out of here is we've already got this population of 11 to 12 million people in this country illegally. They're working either, many of them are working either in the above ground or underground economy. So I don't know what this temporary deferred action, how that all of a sudden causes this surge in economic activity. It just really makes no sense to me whatsoever. Mr. Koss.
Thank you very much. Excellent question. Actually, the component of the very, very small extra increase of only about 0.15% increase in the level of GDP in 2024, relatively little of that is from the DACA-DAPA. The only extent to which it is because of those is because we assume that once people gain this status, they will be less likely to leave the population. If they remain in the population, as you indicate, they'll be part of our population and our base for employment. The biggest share of that really is the other net flows, the entrepreneurs coming in, by 2024.
But again, that should occur through a legal process, and there's no denying that. If we have more entrepreneurs coming through legal immigration process.
Exactly.
If we get the bright, and by the way, I'm supportive of that, if we get the smartest minds in the world, we want them here in America. If we educate them, we want them to stay to produce those innovations and grow our economy. But again, that's a legal immigration system versus an illegal one, which creates all kinds of problems from the standpoint of national security, public health and safety. And again, it's a broken immigration system, which I'm all for fixing. But my final comment is, until we secure the border, it's never going to be perfect, but until we do a better job, and I think Americans are way ahead of us, the public's way ahead of the political process here in terms of wondering why we haven't done that. Until we do that, any part of our immigration law, tax law, that creates an incentive for illegal immigration, I would say DAPA and DACA have created that incentive. As long as we create those incentives for illegal immigration, we'll have more of it. It'll create higher pressure on the border, give Mr. Moran and his compatriots real fits, make their job far more difficult. So this is really, from my standpoint, and the top priority of this committee is to craft an effective and a workable border security bill combined with an immigration enforcement bill that really does take a look at our current immigration laws and try to eliminate or at least drastically reduce the incentives for illegal immigration, because as long as those incentives remain and we haven't secured the border, it's going to be right back to 1986. I mean, you can do whatever you want to do to grant amnesty or take executive action, but as long as we have those incentives in place and we don't have a secure border, we're just going to make the problem worse. But with that, that kind of concludes my participation. Senator Carper.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back on a couple of issues that were raised just to try to provide some clarity. And Mr. Goss, if I'm misstating this, let me know. But I think in instances where formerly undocumented immigrants now have Social Security numbers and can now claim earned income tax credit retroactively, they have to have paid taxes. They have to have gone back and also filed tax returns for, I think, at least 3 years. Is that correct?
That would be my assumption.
That is correct. That is correct. Thank you. Another point, just for clarification, I think also in 2012, I'm told that IRS reformed the ITN application process, and far fewer people apply today. And as a result, we have a lot less fraud. So some of the concerns have been raised. That's appropriate. They've been raised. Some have been addressed. And those that haven't, we need to address them. So thank you for doing that. I'm just reminded of a couple of thoughts here as we come to the end. And one of those is it's unfortunate we've been having this conversation. It's unfortunate we're having this hearing because it's unfortunate we didn't pass the comprehensive immigration reform in the last Congress. We should have. We should have. We wouldn't be having these questions, these battles, and spending your time and our time dealing with this. That's what we should be doing. And to the extent that our Republican friends have concerns, and I appreciate those, over what the President, what the administration has done, they have recourse in court, they're doing that. But I sure as heck hope that we don't shut down the Department of Homeland Security on February 27th when they have a heck of a lot to do. A heck of a lot to do. That would be tragic. The other thing I would say is, Ms. Moran, I want to also thank you and the folks that you represent for your service, continued service to our country. And there's plenty we can do. And when Chairman I and Senator Sass are down on the border, we'll hear about some of the things that we ought to do. And I think your input's appreciated and helpful. But one of the problems in the immigration reform bill was passed. I think we doubled the number of people on the Border Patrol on the border. We don't need to do that. Do we need some extra? Yeah, we do. Do we need? But we especially need people at the ports of entry to do the job there, and we need what I call force multipliers. Force multipliers that actually between the ports of entry that will enable us to enable your folks to be more effective in the work that they do. And the other point, I will continue to make this point to my grave. I've always been a big believer in addressing not just the symptoms of problems, but root causes for problems. That's the key. We're really good around here at addressing symptoms of problems. We're not so good at going at the underlying causes, and we need to do both. Do we need to strengthen our defenses on the border? Of course we do. Do we need some more people? Yes, we do. Do we need better technology? We do. The idea that we put drones up in the air and fixed-wing aircraft in the air without advanced radar systems, which can actually from 25 or 30,000 feet see exactly what's going on the ground in all kinds of weather, day or night. And then the fact we just send aircraft out, maybe with the guys or gals with binoculars looking for people coming to the border. That's crazy. And I spent a lot of time in my life in airplanes, some of it overseas and over the water around the world, and looking for people in ships and wreckage from ships, people in life rafts with binoculars from 500 feet or 1,000 feet. It's hard to do. And when we have the technology we're not using, shame on us. That's the kind of thing we should be doing. I call them force multipliers. But the other thing is imperative as part of on all of the above thoughtful policy to better strengthen our borders. A key element of that is to make sure that in places like Honduras, Guatemala, and Salvador, which is where we're getting most of the illegal immigration across the South Texas border, where they have police that don't police, where they have prosecutors that don't prosecute, where they have judges that don't administer justice, where they have correctional institutions that don't correct the behavior, where they have school systems where in Honduras, grade 1 through 6, that's it. Half the kids only make it to grade 6. Of those that make it to grade 6, only half can read at a 6th grade level. Only 5% can do 6th grade math. In these countries, Honduras, Guatemala, Salvador, they pay 2 or 3 times more for energy than they ought to be paying because they use petroleum, they use oil. And meanwhile, they've got the low-cost natural gas from Mexico. And that ought to be made available to those three countries to help create a more nurturing environment, lower their energy costs. So while we do all the stuff on the border that we're talking about, we need to help them restore the rule of law. We need to make sure that they're doing the kinds of things that they ought to be doing, they want to be doing with respect to their workforce. Hurricane Mitch came through Honduras in 2007, destroyed half the secondary roads. Half the secondary roads. And you got folks in Honduras, one part of Holland, Honduras, would like to be able to export to a neighboring country, and the roads don't even let them go 10 miles to make that work. These are things, it's not for us to fix all these things. It's not all in America. We can be part of the solution, and we need to be. Again, they can do it, we can help. And the other countries, including Mexico and Colombia, the Inter-American Development Banks, they need to be a part of it. Last question I want to ask is this. I want to go back to security implications if I can. And Secretary Johnson and some others have cited several security benefits from deferred deportation initiatives. First, these programs will prompt many of the people living in the shadows to step forward and undergo background checks and enter biometrics into our systems. Second, it will help DHS and others focus limited enforcement resources on the highest priorities for deportation, the highest priorities, those with criminal backgrounds or national security risks, and recent arrivals without ties to the community. Third, it will facilitate better trust and communication among immigrant communities and local law enforcement, improving the safety of communities nationwide. And that's why a number of law enforcement organizations have endorsed the deferred deportation initiatives. Question for you, Mr. Cooper. You dealt with some of these issues of prioritization while at INS, I believe, which included the immigration functions of what is now CBP and ICE, as well as USCIS. Do these arguments make sense to you based on that experience and your work since?
They do. I think the abilities of the department have improved since that time, but that makes entire sense to me. And I think that helps focus on the key question that's before the committee, is comparing a world without DACA and DAPA to a world with DACA and DAPA. And does that enhance the ability of the department to carry out its law enforcement abilities, to carry out its law enforcement responsibilities more effectively? And it seems to me to take the two scenarios that have been raised. One, why would DAPA and DACA expand economic activity? And my understanding is that the answer to that is that with DAPA and DACA, there's going to be more people moving into tax-paying, moving into the tax-paying category. There will be more people who are able to work lawfully and therefore able to get better-paying jobs. Consequently, wage growth pressures and so forth. That wouldn't be the case without the authorization of employment for these people who are, after all, here in the country already, and in most cases working already, just in the shadow economy. On the law enforcement side, with DAPA, there's the scenario that the senator was raising before about what happens when someone's not eligible but has presented themselves. I agree that it's counterintuitive that you might just decide not to try to remove that person when they're right there in front of you. On the other hand, what you have, which you didn't have without DAPA, is all of that person's information in the law enforcement database, which allows for better enforcement if they become a removal priority, or if the resources roll around, or if there's a criminal issue later. And if that officer has made the decision, well, you're someone who does have a U.S. citizen child but can't prove that you've been here for 5 years, you're not eligible for DAPA, but I've got bigger fish to fry. I think most people would regard that as a reasonable exercise of discretion given the finite resources that are facing the department.
Good, thanks. Mr. Chairman, I think it's been a good hearing. Let's work on comprehensive immigration reform. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Senator Carper. Coming from a manufacturing background, root cause analysis is just in my DNA. I'm hoping this was, kind of that first step in trying to develop that root cause analysis. I want to thank all the witnesses again for your thoughtful testimony, both written and oral here. This hearing record will remain open for 15 days until February 19th at 5 p.m. for the submission of statements and questions for the record. This hearing is adjourned.